is from England, and my brother always very strongly identified with that culture, not so much with native culture. So he never went to powwows. He really wasn't as affiliated, and so he was not offered membership.
And why then did he want to become enrolled?
I think, towards the end of his life, he got to the point where he was thinking that might be a good thing. It also, because we do live in between Mashantucket and Mohegan tribes, if he were to be Native American, it would be easier for him to get a job there. That was also another sort of kind of thing to sort of propel him at the time. But I also do believe that, towards the end of his life, he started to think about that part of his culture, but really had never been a part of his life at all.
Didn't study for the test.
No, and again, really wasn't connected in that way.
Yeah. That's interesting. David Troyer, that was one of the things you suggested in one of the pieces you wrote, language requirements or cultural familiarity, being part of the tribe, actually.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in what the caller's saying about how Lumbee do business, and it sounds like maybe an uncomfortable step, but a step in an interesting direction, at least, where we inherited a system, an enrollment system that we didn't devise and didn't really evolve out of tribal ways of thinking. It might vary from tribe to tribe, and it sounds like they're trying to develop criteria that arise out of their own values. That sounds to me, ultimately, as uncomfortable as it might have been in her family, a positive step.
Was it, Kim, do you think?
It was a little uncomfortable because my brother had difficulty understanding how I could be an enrolled member and he couldn't. And so we had conversations, and he certainly could have applied again. Unfortunately, he passed away, so he wasn't able to do that. But it was a little uncomfortable when he came back to Connecticut and he said, well, they wouldn't let me be a member. And I had to sit down and kind of talk to him some more about, what my thoughts were as to why he was not a member and I was. So it was a little difficult. And my son is also an enrolled member. But my nieces have not shown sort of any interest. I have young nieces, so they're a little too young. And my brother's daughter, really not very interested in consideration for enrollment. Was
your son automatically enrolled as your son, or did he have to go through the test too?
He also he went and had an interview. We just did that recently because he's now 18. Had I enrolled him when he was a minor, then he would not have had to do that. He could have been an enrolled member, and then I don't know if when he was an adult whether he'd have to speak with them again because we don't live right in North Carolina because we live in Connecticut.
Well, Kim, thanks very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Here's an email from Roger in Little Rock. My family stories identified my paternal great-grandmother as Cherokee Indian. That would have been fairly common in rural Tennessee, where my father came from. The Trail of Tears went through there on the way to Oklahoma. I met the old lady as a young child and remember she certainly looked like an Indian. My older sister recently confirmed that she also thought that was the situation. I recently sent a DNA sample to 23andMe, and I just got back the results. There is no chance that I have an Indian ancestor within 6 generations. I am 100% European. Damn. I appreciate Elizabeth Warren's situation. I'm looking forward to hearing how her story works out. And as you pointed out in one of your pieces, Marionette Pember, one of the reasons people can get away with calling themselves Native American is Native Americans look like all kinds of people.
Yeah, and I'm now convinced that every third person in the 3-state region here has a Cherokee great-great-grandmother.
They were busy.
They were very busy. There were more tribes than the Cherokees who went on the Trail of Tears, or a bunch of other people. The Muskogee and the Chickasaw, but for some reason, the Cherokees get really laid claim to. They must be like probably the most prolific group of people on the face of the earth. So I think maybe there have been films about the Trail of Tears, and I do think that the Cherokees were, they did particularly suffer, when they were marched from their homelands to the Indian territories in Oklahoma. But it's just sort of an interesting phenomenon that we find folks always. It's always on the maternal side, which I think is interesting. It's always a grandmother, great grandmother, and she always has coal black hair. That's always the thing I get when people approach me. So I think that's very interesting.
Let's go to Jossie. Jossie with us from Suquamish in Washington.
How you doing?
Good, thanks.
Good.
And was there an example where you saw someone claim Native American?
Absolutely. I've seen it. I was fortunate enough to go to school to a private university, and you see examples. You see, like the brother in Arkansas spoke about. I'm a member of the Blackfeet tribe from Montana, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But you see people like the brother in Arkansas that just wants to affiliate. You just want to be associated with something that's part of a larger group, and possibly, as the young man said, a romanticized group, this image, this idea of Indian. But then also you see people in the educational context and also in the work context that, seriously want to ascertain a substantive right as a result of that identity. And that's where there gets to be a problem. There's nothing wrong. There's absolutely nothing wrong. All of us have notions. All of us have these ideas and self-romanticization of our history, our lineage. All of us come from some sort of sense of royalty. But then when it comes to, well, we want to gain something as a result of this identity, as happens in the educational context at the school that I went to and numerous other schools as well, then there's a problem, because then it's coming at the exclusion of some, more deserving Native person that actually has paid part of the burden of being a Native person, because there is a burden associated with.
And it's interesting, again, Marionette Pember, that's one of the things you write about, that there's this appropriation is, it is taking something.
It's sort of the final, taking, final appropriation. Yeah, I think there's an element of that, particularly I think when folks, they sort of cherry pick, various spiritual practices and sort of put it in a blender and then, charge. And it's actually become kind of a cottage industry. I mean, you can just do a real cursory search online, and there's, a number of people who have set themselves up as healers and spiritual leaders who will, present you with a Indian power animal or an Indian name for a fee. There's a tribe that does. It was an interesting case. There's a tribe that charges for. You can do it online. They will spiritually adopt you for $250, and they also do this sort of what they call traditional healing. And there was a case that David probably remembers as well in Minnesota of a boy whose parents became part of this tribe, and he had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they were refusing traditional medical treatment because they were healing with this online church tribes means, and eventually, of course, the courts, forced the parents to get him medical treatment. So, I mean, in that case, that's it's kind of dangerous.
Jossie, thanks very much for the call.
Yes, sir.
Here's an email from Veronica in Ann Arbor. I'd like to hear what David Troyer has to say about the importance of being recognized by other Native people as Native.
Well, I think that's that's hugely important to a lot of different people, and maybe Veronica's asking me because I'm fairly light-skinned and I had reddish and now I have brownish hair, and I think for in terms of how you identify yourself, it is always complicated, and it always feels good to be recognized by the groups that you feel you belong to. And it can be really complicated. It can eat people up, and it never really ate me up too much. But it was certainly something I had to deal with.
Here is an a tweet from Spencer. How is blood criteria not racism? The U.S. made contracts with slave owners, but those went out when society deemed it immoral.
Is that a question for me?
I think so, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's an argument. That's a real argument on one hand. On the other, blood quantum is despite its complicated origins and its complicated execution, a criteria for membership to a tribe, which is to say it's a criteria for citizenship, right? Mm-hmm. All nations have the right to set their own citizenship requirements. Some of them, if you think globally, there are language requirements, there are residency requirements, there are birth requirements, there are compulsory military service requirements. There are all sorts of requirements, and it's up to each nation to decide that. No one's saying that you can't feel or be whoever you think you are or live your dream, no matter how fantastic. We're talking about memberships to sovereign nations, and all sovereign nations have the capability to determine their own membership. I wish that it's my hope that tribes get a lot more creative and a lot more thoughtful as they set their own criteria based on their own standards with an eye towards strengthening their tribes. That's my hope.
David Troyer, his book is Res Life, An Indian's Journey Through Reservation Life. Also with us is Mary Annette Pember, a freelance journalist who focuses on Native issues and culture. You're listening to Talk of the Nation from NPR News. Let's go to Cody, and Cody's on the line with us from Denver.
How you doing?
Good, thanks.
I grew up in a small town in Idaho where we actually have a lot of Nez Perce, Lapwai, Indian, and there was a kid that I went to school with that, as one of your guests mentioned earlier, arbitrarily in high school just claimed Cherokee heritage and wore what he imagined to be Cherokee clothing and practiced Cherokee spirituality, and it seemed a lot of us who actually have friends who are members of various tribes. I've got a friend who's very involved in the Cayuse-Umatilla tribe. It didn't offend a lot of us, but it was just one of those things that we saw pop up once in a while. And it seems like I actually study anthropology and ethnography, and you do see that a lot, and it isn't as harmful as a lot of the other guests have mentioned when it's just that. But when it does become complicated, things like when we've got dividends and stuff from various tribes that come in from gaming, or like in places they have a documentary, I think, of Brazil, where you have membership to college based on ethnicity, and they had a lot of Afro-Brazilians all of a sudden pop up. That's when it does become complicated, and it now where I live in Colorado isn't such an issue, but throughout Idaho I saw that, through the years of living there quite a bit, and nobody ever seemed to want to spend time, let's say, on the Lapwai reservation and help them out. It just seemed like something they did as a chic thing, to say that you're, and it always, for some reason, seems to be Cherokee. I don't know why that is.
As Mary,
it's very popular.
Did you talk to him?
Yeah, I mean, he was, he was a friend of a lot of ours, and just, all of a sudden one day decided he was a Cherokee, and even went by the moniker of, I don't want to say his name, but Cherokee, let's say Cherokee Jim. And we were all sophomores in high school, and he got made fun of a lot for it. And, I mean, as I said, to those of us who actually grew up around various members of different tribes, it didn't offend us. Some members of the town, it seemed like that did offend them because they had a legitimate claim to membership. And, again, they went through the trials and the tribulations associated with being a member of a sovereign nation like that. But as far as I know, he eventually grew out of it, but it was a big thing for a long time, and I think he even had a theme song.
Oh, boy. A lot of us do stupid stuff in high school, don't we?
Yes.
I think that covers all races. Anyway, thanks for the call, Cody. And there was David Troyer. This is another irony, is that people can be 100% Native American, but because of intermarriages, not be on any individual tribe's enrollment rolls.
Oh, yeah, sure. That happens all the time. A lot of tribes will base their criteria on, say, a quarter blood from that tribe. But as you say, through intermarriage, their parents and grandparents and going back married native folk from other tribes. And so they could very well be, in fact, full-blooded, but not have enough blood from any one tribe to be enrolled. And it's very, very strange. But we're talking. Enrollment is one thing. It doesn't say anything about one's culture or one's values or language. Those are things we should think about as well, not just what it says on the paper.
David Troyer, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.
David Troyer, author of Res Life, joined us from member station KNBJ in Bemidji, Minnesota, professor of English at the University of Southern California.